one of the questions, one of the challenges of economics is macro versus microeconomics.
Yeah.
Is the world is made up of individuals. So there's a connection to this our discussion of race and discrimination and outcomes and all those kinds of things. The world is made up of individuals, but in order to say something general, we have to construct groups. In order to analyze the data, we have to aggregate that data somehow. We have to make an average over some set of people. So what are the pros and cons of looking at things like equality of opportunity and equality of outcome based on groups versus based on individuals? And what are the groups, if there's any pros to looking at groups that we should be looking at?
Okay, well, those are big questions. I mean, in economics, you're right. I mean, micro, you have an account of how individuals make decisions about spending their money on the consumption side, and about how enterprises make decisions about what to produce, how much of it, what inputs to use, what techniques of production, and so on. Individual firms, individual consumers, and then you want to aggregate. So there's a so-called theory of general equilibrium, where you think supply and demand in a bunch of markets, you think prices that move to equilibrate, but you recognize that the price in one market affects people's behavior in another. The markets are interacting with each other. You realize that the behavior of one individual affects the supplies and available resources, and for other individuals, so they're knitted together in some kind of systematic way. And you want to try to demonstrate the fact that, notwithstanding all these interdependencies, there exists a solution to the system of equations that equates demand and supply across all the different markets. This is the existence of general equilibrium. Then you want to try to say something about the properties of an equilibrium if it exists. Is it efficient? Well, what do you mean by efficiency? Well, the idea of so-called Pareto efficient outcomes. These are outcomes that cannot be uniformly improved upon. Everybody can't be made better off by an alternative outcome. You want to demonstrate the efficiency of competitive equilibrium. What do you mean by competition? You mean that people take their actions to do the best for themselves that they can, profits of firms, well-being of consumers. They try to do the best for themselves that they can. But they do so in reference to a set of prices that they believe they cannot control. That's the criterion of competitive market circumstance. So does a competitive equilibrium exist? Do there exist a set of prices which, if everybody recognizes them as given and responds to those prices on behalf of their own interest, the outcome will be supply equaling demand in all the markets where people are interacting with one another? And that requires the use of some concepts in topology, fixed point theorems and whatnot that are familiar to mathematics. Not very deep mathematical results, but important to economics. That's all about general equilibrium and whatnot. But you ask about groups.
By the way, amazing whirlwind summary of all of economics. But yes, go ahead. That was great.
Well,
markets, of competition, of Pareto efficiency. Anyway, but yes, groups
and prices
and prices.
And by the way, there are some very beautiful, formalizations of everything that I'm saying here. You end up in vector spaces. You end up with sets of bundles of consumption and production. You end up with convexity. You end up with hyperplanes, which are, in this finite dimensional vector space, which are, all of the bundles that have the same value at a certain price value. You end up with inner products, and it's very pretty.
Yeah, but you almost forget that it's just a bunch of humans transacting with each other. That markets are made up of individuals.
Markets are made up of individuals, and in order to carry out this formalization, you have to make assumptions about the individuals, and the end result is true in a formal sense, but may not be true as a representation of the reality, because it depends upon assumptions that themselves may not hold. But at least you know what it is that has to be true in order for your formal framework to be relevant, which is already a step in the right direction, I think. I mean, the formalization is better than the intuition, the armchair intuition, where we sit back and we don't really know exactly what we're talking about because we haven't pinned it down in a precise way. I'm in favor of the formalization. People, they think, what is mathematics and the social sciences? After all, we're dealing with people. People are not automata. I agree with that. But the analysis of the interaction of people, I think, to be rigorous, requires us to be specific about what we're talking about markets, about consumers, about firms, about profits, about technology, about preferences. And that's the language of economics. But people's behavior depends upon what they seek in life. It depends upon their goals and their objectives. Those things are at play. They can be pushed this way or that. So, I mean, nationalism, fighting and dying for your country, religion, sacrificing on behalf of some abstract ideal of the good or of, what is the human situation and what is the meaning of life. Economists have to assume that these things are some particular thing before they can turn the crank on their machine to analyze the outcomes of human interaction. And yet these things, belief in my identity, but the things that I'm willing to sacrifice and die for, purposes of life that I affirm and pass on to my children, are important preconditions for actually carrying out any economic analysis. And they are subject to manipulation and to change over time. And that's not something that economics has a whole lot to say about.
Well, is there